So we left off at Dysart syndrome, and it was the aberrant development of third and fourth pouches, which causes T cell deficiency, thymic aplasia, and hypocalcemia failure of parathyroid development. And it is associated with cardiac defects, specifically conotruncal anomalies. Then we had BEN2A, which is a mutation of germline RAT. That is derived from neural crest cells, and it affects mainly three tissues, the parathyroid, and causes parathyroid hyperplasia there, the thyroid C cells, and causes medullary thyroid carcinoma, and also the adrenal medulla and causes pheochromocytoma. So yeah, adrenal medulla for pheochromocytoma, parathyroid tumor for third and fourth pharyngeal pouches, and parafollicular cells, medullary thyroid cancer, which are derived from neural crest cells associated with fourth and fifth pharyngeal pouches. So it affects these three tissues. Then we have cleft lip and cleft palate. This is cleft lip. There is a cleft in the development of lip, and this is cleft palate. um, there is a defect in the development of palate. So cleft lip is caused by the failure of fusion of maxillary and medial nasal processes. Basically the formation of primary plate there. And cleft palate is caused by the defects in the formation of secondary palate. There are two distinct etiologies, but they often occur together. So, cleft palate is the failure of fusion of the two lateral palatine processes, or failure of fusion of lateral palatine processes with nasal septum, and or median palatine processes. Basically, formation of secondary palate. So, cleft lip, failure of fusion of maxillary and medial nasal process, or the primary palate formation, and cleft palate, formation of secondary palate, or fusion of two lateral palatine processes, or fusion of lateral palatine process with the nasal process. Medial nasal process with maxillary, lateral nasal process with the nasal septum. The fusions, these fusions are defective. Moving on, we have genital embryology. There's this diagram, and yeah, that diagram is pretty much all we need for genital embryology. Um, so this structure is the urogenital sinus. The green portion is the mesonephric duct. The yellow portion is the paramesonephric duct, and the green portion inside the kidney is the mesonephros, and this blue bulging is the indifferent gonad, and this whole structure in pink is the gubernaculum. So for female, there is default development, mesonephric duct degenerates, and paramesonephric duct develops. The paramesonephric duct is the female duct, and it persists in a female, and the default development is that of a female. In males, the SRY gene on Y chromosome, I think we should do this one first. So there's SRY gene on Y chromosome, as males are XY, and it secretes the testes determining factor. And this testis determining factor, TDF, makes the testes. The testes have Sertoli cells and Leydig cells. Um, Sertoli cells form Mullerian inhibitory factor, which causes the degeneration of paramesonephric duct or Mullerian duct, which is the female duct, as I mentioned before. And then the Leydig cells, they secrete testosterone, and testosterone causes the Wolffian duct to be converted into male internal genitalia. The Wolffian duct is also called mesonephric duct, and the testosterone secretes DHT, and DHT causes the genital tubercle and urogenital sinus to be converted into male external genitalia and the prostate. So, the Wolffian duct forms the male internal genitalia except prostate, and the genital tubercle and urogenital sinus under the influence of DHT form male external genitalia or prostate. Um, let's read this as well. No Sertoli cells or lack of Mullerian inhibitory factor, right here. If there are no Sertoli cells or there is a lack of Mullerian inhibitory factor, it causes the development of both male and female internal genitalia and male external genitalia. So the paramesonephric duct will persist if there is no Sertoli cells or no Mullerian inhibitor factor, and there will be development of female internal genitalia as well as male internal genitalia through the Leydig cell pathway. And the second process here, if there is no testosterone or 5-alpha reductase deficiency, this enzyme's deficiency, then the male internal genitalia, ambiguous external genitalia until puberty when increased testosterone levels cause masculinization. So, um, the male internal genitalia will um, develop, but there'd be ambiguous external genitalia, and they'll be till puberty, because after puberty there is increased testosterone levels, which will eventually cause masculinization of the genitalia. So, in the males, the SRY gene on Y chromosome produces testes determining factor, which causes testes development. Sertoli cells secrete MIF that suppresses the development of paramesonephric ducts. Leydig cells secrete androgens that stimulate development of mesonephric ducts. Paramesonephric or Mullerian duct, this one develops into female internal structures, including the fallopian tubes, uterus, upper portion of vagina, from the lower portion of urogenital sinus. And Mullerian agenesis may be present as primary amenorrhea due to lack of uterine development in females with fully developed secondary sexual characteristics because of functional ovaries. So, if there is no Mullerian duct, there will be primary amenorrhea because these structures will be absent, the fallopian tubes, uterus, and upper portion of vagina. But the female secondary sexual characteristics will develop because the ovaries have no anomaly. So, moving on to the mesonephric or Wolffian duct, it develops into male internal structures except prostate, and they can be remembered from the mnemonic seed, which has seminal vesicles, epididymis, ejaculatory duct, and ductus deferens. So in females, the remnant of mesonephric duct forms Gartner duct. Yeah, so the mesonephric duct obliterates in the female and forms the Gartner duct. Um, Now we have to discuss some uterine or Mullerian duct anomalies. It is also called the paramesonephric duct, and we have just studied that Mullerian agenesis can cause amenorrhea with fully developed secondary sexual characteristics. We also discussed in our teratogens, I discussed this. um, yes, diethylstilbestrol DES, vaginal clear cell adenocarcinoma causing teratogen, and it causes congenital Mullerian anomalies. So this is important to remember and recall at this point. So back to our Mullerian anomalies. Okay, so separate uterus. Um, this is a normal uterus, by the way, a normal uterus, and this is a normal uterine X-ray, and mm, there's what they're trying to say is that this is a normal uterus. Oh, this is septate uterus, right? Septate, bicornuate, and uterus didelphys. So septate uterus. It is the incomplete resorption of septum, and there is decreased fertility and treat with septoplasty. All right. So the septum of the uterus has not been completely resorbed into the wall. So there is this portion of the septum, and uh, this is present as like this V-shaped structure um, in the radiograph. Yes, and in bicornuate, there is incomplete fusion of Mullerian ducts. So uh, there's incomplete fusion of the Mullerian ducts, and it causes increased risk of complicated pregnancy. And in uterus diadelphys, complete failure of fusion. There is no fusion of the Mullerian ducts, and this causes double uterus, vagina, and cervix, and pregnancy is possible in this case. So this is a normal uterus and the fusion is normal. This is the separate uterus and the separate septum has not been completely resolved and it requires septoplasty. And this one is a bicornuate uterus with incomplete fusion of Mullerian ducts. And this one has complete failure of fusion. And since there is no fusion, so they're separate uterus, vagina, and cervix. Moving on to male and female genital homologues. This is the undifferentiated structure, and this is the female anatomy, and this is the male anatomy. So starting from the undifferentiated structure, we have the genital tubercle right here. This is the genital tubercle, and in the females, it will form, let's highlight it accordingly. In females, it will form glans clitoris, and in the male, it will form the glans penis. Changing the colors, we have the genital. Okay, so the genital tubercle is also forming uh, mm, vestibular bulbs and the corpus cavernosum and spongiosum. These are part of male and female anatomy. Um, and then we have the urogenital sinus. Let's change colors for that. The urogenital sinus right here. Yeah. The urogenital sinus right here. The genital groove above it, the urogenital folds on each of its side, and the anus right there, and labioscrotal swellings on the vertical side. So in the urogenital sinus, it develops into greater vestibular glands of Bartholin in the female under the effective estrogen, and it develops into bulbourethral glands of Cowper in the male. So it forms glands, greater vestibular glands in the female and bulbourethral glands in the male, the urogenital sinus. And it also develops into the prostate gland in the male and the urethral and paraurethral glands of skin in the female. So the urogenital sinus is basically involved in the development of glands. And now we have the urogenital folds, mm, this structure right around the urogenital sinus. Yep. This urogenital folds. So the urogenital folds in the female develop into labia minora, and in the males it develops into ventral shaft of the penis or the penile urethra. Right. And the labioscrotal swelling, the very lateral structure, it develops into the labia majora in the female and the scrotum in the male. So labioscrotal swellings, this structure. It develops into the labia majora in the female. The outer, if you look at it, it's basically the biggest portion. So labia majora and the scrotum, which is also a big structure among those we have studied right here. So the labioscrotal swellings form the labia majora and the scrotum. The urogenital folds form the labia minora and the ventral shaft of penis. The urogenital sinus in between the folds forms the glands, all the glands, bulbourethral and prostate in the male, and greater vestibular glands and urethral and paraurethral glands in the female. The genital tubercle develops into vestibular bulbs and glands, clitoris in the female, and the glands penis and corpus cavernosum and spongiosum in the male. Now we have some congenital penile abnormalities, which involve hypospadias and epispadias. Um, this is the normal pathway for the penile urethra. This is the penis, this is the shaft of the penis. So with hypospadias, there's abnormal opening of penile urethra on the ventral surface of penis due to failure of urethral folds to fuse. Abnormal opening of the basic point to remember is that it's in the ventral surface of penis, hypospadias. This here, this is the ventral surface and this is the dorsal surface of the penis. So there's a normal opening in the ventral surface of penis due to failure of fusion of urethral folds. It is more common than epispadias and associated with inguinal hernia and cryptorchidism. Cryptorchidism is basically failure of testes to descend, and hypo means below, and below the penis is the ventral surface of the penis. In epispadias, there's abnormal opening of penile urethra on dorsal surface of penis due to faulty positioning of genital tubercle. So this was due to failure of urethral folds to fuse, and this one is on the dorsal surface, epi, and it is because of the faulty positioning of the genital tubercle. And just to revise, genital tubercle was forming glans penis and corpus cavernosum and spongiosum in the males, so its anomaly will cause epispadias. And with E, we should remember that it causes exostrophy of bladder, and when you have epispadias, you hit your eye when you pee. So it's all about E's. And the last topic of this embryology part is the descent of testes and ovaries, gubernaculum and processus vaginalis, which which vaginates the peritoneum. Okay, these were two structures. Gubernaculum is a band of fibrous tissue, and processus vaginalis is formed by evagination of peritoneum. It is basically an evagination of the peritoneum. So they have a male remnant and a female remnant. In males, the gubernaculum anchors the testes within scrotum, and in females, it forms the ovarian ligament as well as the round ligament of uterus. And the processus vaginalis forms the tunica vaginalis, very obvious in the males, and is obliterated in the females. This was the gubernaculum for reference, this big structure. See you in next part.